to all the moms of children who are still at home or all grown up, moms who've outlived a son or daughter, or moms of babies they never got to hold, moms who've raised kids all on their own or became a mom to someone who needed one, moms of children who have wandered from God, or the longing to be moms who are still waiting. God perfectly arranged each of you into the role you have today. His word recognizes you as capable, strong, and praiseworthy. Everything you do makes our lives more beautiful. Happy Mother's Day.
So just want to echo what the video says. To all the ladies in the room, happy Mother's Day. We are so incredibly grateful for you, and we are blessed by you. You know, Mother's Day really is one of those days that a lot of times carries with it some mixed emotions, because maybe you're here this morning and it is a fantastic day. You're with your family and everybody's having a good time with big smiles on your faces. Maybe you're here this morning and you're an expectant mom and you're kind of waiting for that moment when the baby's going to come. Or maybe you're here this morning and you're a new mom and you're not sleeping at all, so you're a little exhausted, but you're still really happy to be a mom. Maybe you're a mom in the thick of it, right? Your kids are in middle school or in high school and you're just kind of waiting for that moment when they get out of school and out of your house. Maybe you are an empty nester and there's a part of you that's really happy about that, but there's also a part of you that's a little sad. But in general, today's a good day and a happy day. But then again, on the other side of it, maybe today is a lot harder. Maybe you are one of those folks who always wanted to be a mom, but for whatever reason, it just never quite worked out. Especially for you, here's what I want you to know. You're a mom to somebody. Because you are a blessing, you give us love and compassion and care, and we're grateful for you. Maybe today is your first Mother's Day without your mom, or maybe today you're grieving the loss of a child, and it kind of feels heavy. If that's where you're at, we want you to know that we love you, and we care for you, and we're praying for you, and you continue to be a blessing to us. And so no matter where you are on the spectrum of how you're feeling on a day like today, we are grateful for you, and thanks for being here in worship this morning. In fact, today, as we begin the message, I want to start with a verse that is actually kind of for moms. And actually, it's not just for moms, it's also for dads too. It's for parents of all ages and kinds. And it's actually a verse about what makes parents, a lot of times parents, which is you have some kids that you have to deal with. And the verse is a pretty famous one. It's from Proverbs 22, verse 6. And it goes like this: train up a child in the way he should go. And even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, this is, as I said, a pretty famous verse. In fact, how many of y'all have heard this verse before? Just raise your hands. Okay, I think most of us have, and if you haven't, that's okay. How many of you maybe somewhere over the course of your parenting adventure have prayed these words for your child, right? You want to train them up so that even when they're old, they will get wise decisions made in their lives. How many of you have ever been maybe a little frustrated by these words before? Because here's the thing, you look at these words and you go, okay, so this is how it's supposed to go. I train up my child in the way that he or she should go, and when they get old, they're going to follow all of my advice. But then they get old, and you know what they don't do? They don't follow all of your advice. And this starts really young. It starts when they're toddlers and they throw temper tantrums. You want to train them up in the way they should go, and yet they don't always follow. It continues as they're teenagers and you just want to have a talk with them and they give you that stone cold stare and shoulder. You're just trying to give them all your wisdom and all your guidance. You're trying to train them up in the way that they should go, and they don't want to follow. And then sometimes it even continues into their 20s. And 30s and 40s. Should I stop there or should I keep going? And when it continues, like even into their adult years, you go back to that verse. You go back to Proverbs 22, verse 6, and you focus in on one word in that verse. Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is what? old, okay? And if you have an adult kid and you're still kind of worried about them, you focus in on that word and you say, how old is going to be old enough for them to actually listen to what I have to say, right? How old do they have to be for them to stop behaving so foolishly? We'll come back to that a little bit later in the message. So this week in Design, we're actually wrapping up a whole series we've been in for the past several weeks called Detour. And just in case you haven't been here, let me give you the background on this series. If you're a planner in life, you may have noticed that sometimes you make plans and things don't always go according to plan. And you can be the ultimate type A personality and dot every I and cross every T and try to cover every contingency. But still, despite your best efforts, sometimes things don't always turn out the way you think they should be. And when things happen that you cannot plan for, that is when your life can take sometimes a pretty major and massive detour, hence the title for this whole sermon series. And in this sermon series, we've been asking one big question, which is this. How do you respond when something in life happens that is way beyond anything that you planned on? What do you do when all of your plans fall apart? And today, as we conclude our series, we're going to be talking about detours in parenting, or detours with your kids. What do you do when your kids do not behave the way that Proverbs 22 verse 6 tells them to? Like, how do you respond to that? How do you get them back on track? Now, to get at that question, I want to walk through and work through with you the life and times of an Old Testament prophet. His name is Hosea. We actually read a little section from one of the books that he writes in the Old Testament a little bit earlier in the service. And the prophet Hosea, he served the nation of Israel, in fact, the northern half of the nation of Israel, during the second half of the 8th century BC. And Hosea actually had a pretty hard ministry, because the second half of the 8th century BC in the nation of Israel wasn't exactly a great time to be in the nation of Israel. Israel, on the one hand, was having all sorts of political problems. Over the course of 30 years, the nation of Israel had 6 kings, which means that each king reigned for an average of, can you do the math, 5 years apiece. Now, that's not very long for a monarch. Let's put this in perspective. Queen Elizabeth II, who just passed away, she was on the throne for over 70 years. There was one king of Israel during this time who was on the throne for only 6 months before he got assassinated. His name was Zechariah. The king who came right after him, his name was Shalom. He was on the throne for only 1 month before he was assassinated. And so during the time in the ministry of Hosea, there was a lot of political upheaval in the nation of Israel. But there wasn't just political upheaval in the nation of Israel, there was also the geopolitical upheaval in the nation of Israel. Because during this time, during Hosea's ministry, the biggest, baddest empire in the world was the empire of Assyria. And Assyria was basically traveling the world, making mincemeat out of all the nations that were around the nation of Israel. And Assyria actually began to invade the nation of Israel. In fact, no fewer than 6 times over the course of Hosea's life and ministry. And so Israel was having political problems. They were having geopolitical problems. But beneath and behind it all, they were also having some spiritual problems. Hosea served in the nation of Israel during a time where the Israelites, the ancient Jews, were not known for their moral rectitude. They were falling into all sorts of sin. And Hosea actually has to call them out on their sin. This is what Hosea says in Hosea 4, beginning in verse 1. He says, here's your problem, Israel. There's no faithfulness, no love, and no acknowledgement of God in the land of Israel. In fact, here's all you do. You only curse, you only lie, you only murder, you only steal, you only commit adultery, and you only break all bounds. Here's kind of the picture. If the song is true and life really is a highway, there are boundaries, guardrails on either side of that highway, and here's what Israel's doing. They're breaking through all of them, and they're going on a detour into all sorts of sinful depravity. And Hosea is the one who is commissioned and called by God to deal with this all. And so here's the way he deals with it. He invites Israel to engage in a little, thought experiment. He says, here's what I want you to do. Imagine that God is your parent, and you are his children. Think about the ways that you're behaving. Think about the lying and the cursing and the murder and the stealing and the adultery. How do you think all of that, if you're God's children, how do you think all of that makes God feel? Well, you don't have to imagine how it makes God feel, because God has told me how it makes him feel, and now I'm going to tell you how it makes him feel. This is how it makes God feel, Hosea says to Israel. Hosea 11, verse 1. God said to me, when Israel was a child, I loved him. He was so cute and so cuddly, and then he grew up. But out of Egypt, God continues, I called my son. What God does when he thinks about his relationship with Israel is he turns the clock back about 700 years from the life and the ministry of Hosea. And he says to Israel, 700 years earlier, when you were a nation, when you were just a little tiny kid, you were enslaved to the biggest, baddest empire in that day, which was the empire of Egypt. And I didn't like your slavery, and so I wanted to rescue you. Here's what I did. I got a man named Moses. You may have heard of him before. And I rescued you from your slavery in Egypt. I led you across a Red Sea out of slavery into freedom. And if you don't know the story, there's a whole book in the Old Testament devoted to the story called the Book of Exodus. It is a great read. I'd invite you to read it. But here's the problem. When God did that, as Israel grew, Hosea 11 verse 2, the more they were called, the more I called out to them, the more they went away from me. And here's where Hosea's prophecy gets very relevant for you and for me. Because I think we've all experienced this before, right? Where you call out to or call for your kids, but they run away from you. This starts really early, like when you ask your kids to clean up their room. You yell it from downstairs to upstairs, and the only response you get in return is a closed door because they didn't hear it, right? And the more you call, the more they stall because they don't want to clean up their room. Now it continues as they get a little bit older. And sometimes, quite frankly, just very candidly, it continues in some very serious and sobering ways. If you've got a child who's fallen into like some sort of substance abuse or drug use, you may try to sit them down and have a serious conversation with them. But the more you try to call, the more they try to stall the conversation. Or maybe you have a child who you raised right, you raised them in church, but now they've wandered away from the faith. And you just want to have a conversation with them about the faith. But the more you try to call, the more they try to stall that conversation. God says about Israel, it didn't always used to be this way. In fact, he gets a little nostalgic. Hosea 11 verse 3, he says, back when Israel was a baby, it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. And Ephraim is another name for Israel. And here's how I taught them to walk. I took them by the arms. And this is one of those pictures that I think every parent who has taught a child to walk understands. When your kids are first learning how to walk, what do? You pick them up by the arms and you say, now put one foot in front of the other. In fact, I brought a picture here for you this morning. This is a picture of my daughter, Hope, when she was about 9 months old. And right behind her is my favorite mother of all time, because that's Melody, and she's teaching Hope to walk, and that's the way you do it. God says that's what I was doing with Israel. I was picking them up by the arms, helping them walk. When they couldn't even crawl because they were in slavery, I taught them how to walk. In fact, more than that, I taught them how to run into their freedom from Egypt. But here's the problem. I taught them all of that, and they didn't even realize it was me who rescued them. They didn't even realize it was me who gave them peace. They didn't even realize it was me who healed them. I taught them how to walk, and here's what they started doing. They started walking away from me. I taught them how to talk, and here's what they did. They started talking back to me. I tried to give them their independence, their freedom from slavery in Egypt, but here's what they used it for. They used it to try to gain their independence from me. Does any parent in the room know this feeling at all? You ever been there? You ever had that experience? You know, whenever our kids don't behave the way that we want them to, and they do something bad and it makes us mad, we tend to try to fix it. And we go to a couple of very common fix-it strategies. The first fix-it strategy that we'll go to is the strategy of rule making. And we start this really, really early. When you have like a toddler and they don't want to share with their brother or their sister, what do? You make up a rule on the spot and you say, okay, you can play with the toy for 5 minutes, and then they can play with the toy for 5 minutes. And then you can play with the toy for 5 minutes, and they can play with the toy for 5 minutes. And the rule always works, right? Like, it never works. It's amazing how stubborn and how strong toddlers can be when they got a toy in their hand. You say, share the toy, and what do they say? No. And they hold on to it with superhuman strength. Okay, just so you know, you're not the only one who has this problem. You know who else has this problem? God has this problem. Because he makes the rules, and you know what Israel says to the rules? No. Back to Hosea 4, verse 2, there's only cursing, only lying, only murder, only stealing, only adultery. And what do? They break all the bounds. They just discard, God says, all the rules. Now, there's a reason. There's a reason Israel's not very good at following the rules. And there's a reason your kids aren't very good at following the rules. In fact, just to put a real fine point on this, there's a reason you're not very good at following the rules. Here's why. Because we don't like and we don't want to follow the rules. Have you said it before? Rules are made to be what? Broken. You've probably used that excuse before. Well, so does your kid. Here's the reality. People are bad at following rules. But here's what else you need to know. People are much better at following people. And here's where this gets hard for us as parents. Because the truth is this, our kids learn a lot more from our behavior than they do from our rules. You can tell your kids to share till you're blue in the face, and you can make all sorts of rules about sharing, but if you're not a generous person, if you never put anything in the offering plate, never help somebody in need, never give to your favorite charity, your kids are watching that, and they're learning from that. And ultimately, they might just become just like that, just like you. Which is why just piling up rules doesn't really work when your child's misbehaving, when your child's going on a detour. Now, this leads us to the second strategy that a lot of us try, because when rule making doesn't work, we'll go for something else. And the second strategy that a lot of parents will try is the strategy of enabling, where if you can't correct the poor behavior, what do? You try to cover the poor behavior. And so you got your 21-year-olds, and they get their first credit card, and it has a 36.5% APR on it, and your 21-year-old doesn't even know what APR stands for, but they know that all they got to do is swipe it, and they can get whatever they want. And so what do? They swipe it, and they get whatever they want, and all of a sudden the first bill comes in, and it's a bill they can't pay. And what do you do as mom or dad? You say, that's okay, and you sweep in and save the day. Now, you would never call that enabling. You know what you would call that? helping. That's what we always call it. But here's what you need to understand. There's a very thin line. There's a very thin line between helping someone and enabling someone. And sometimes at first, you don't even know where that line is. If your 21-year-old maxes out the credit card and they have a bill they can't pay, and you decide to sweep in and save the day and pay it for them, and all of a sudden they become the perfect fiscal conservative and they never do it again, and they learn how to scrimp and they learn how to save, guess what? You haven't enabled, you have actually helped, because they have learned a lesson. But if you do all that and they turn around and do it again, and you help them again, and you bail them out again and again and again and again, you know what you've done? You've moved from helping to enabling. You see, so often the line between helping and enabling isn't so much about what you do, at least at first. It's about how your kid responds to what you do. Respond well to your help. Sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. Because sometimes they don't need to learn the lesson from you. They need to learn the lesson from life. There's a very highly acclaimed, highly accredited school that a lot of kids have to go to called the School of Hard what? Knocks. And sometimes that's the only way you don't enable your kids. You know, God knows about this too. Because God tried to help Israel over and over and over again. In fact, one of the saddest lines in the book of the prophet Hosea, Hosea 13, verse 9, God finally has to say to Israel, Israel, you're destroyed because you are against me, against your, and then notice how God refers to himself. He refers to himself as Israel's helper. God says to Israel, I've tried to help you again and again and again and again with your sin. I've given you grace. I've given you mercy. But you've just used it and abused it. And so now you're going to go to the School of Hard Knocks. And you're going to be destroyed. And by the way, what God says comes true. Because in the year 722 BC, the biggest, baddest empire in the world at this time, the empire of Assyria, they sweep into the nation of Israel. And this time, they're not just sweeping in to invade, they're sweeping in to conquer. And they do. And they carry off a lot of the Israelites living there at that time as POWs into the empire of Assyria. Now, for just a second, imagine if you were God watching all of that unfold. How would you feel? About something like that happening to your kids? Can you imagine how heartbroken God must have been? This is why, as parents, we don't want stuff like that to happen to our kids because we love them. And so here's the question. How do you stop that kind of thing from happening? How do you fix it? You know, I think this is part of the reason that so many of us go back to Proverbs 22, verse 6 again and again and again. We say, well, here's how I fix it. I just got to train up a child in the way he should go. And even when he's old, he won't depart from it. We keep on looking for some magical method of training or some secret strategy or some perfect set of rules or some way to help our kids that will help them help themselves. And yet sometimes, no matter how hard we try, things don't turn out the way we want them to. Now, there's a reason for that. Let me tell you a couple of things about Proverbs 22, verse 6, okay? First thing you need to know about Proverbs 22, verse 6. Proverbs 22, verse 6 is in a book called the Book of Proverbs, which means this verse is something called a proverb, which I know seems very self-evident, but there's a reason I bring this up. There is a difference, and it's a very important difference between something that is a proverb and something that is a promise. A promise is a specific forecast, a specific statement about what will happen, guaranteed. A proverb is a general statement about what mostly happens, even if it doesn't happen all the time. And that's what Proverbs 22 verse 6 is. It's a proverb, it's not a promise. So when I was a teenager and I was first driving, when I first got my driver's license, my parents always used to say to me, okay, Zachary, when you take out the car, drive carefully so you don't get in a wreck. Now, that warning from my parents, you know what that is? That's a proverb. Because it's a general statement about what will happen most of the time if I drive carefully, but not necessarily all of the time. Because if I drive carefully, if I drive, not like a teenager, if I actually go the speed limit, and I don't do like that roll in California stop, not that I've ever done that before, or if I always use my turn signal, I don't cut off anybody in traffic, not that I've ever done that before either, right? If I drive carefully and defensively, the chances of me getting in a wreck go way down because I'm not likely to be the one causing the wreck. And so it will generally happen that if I drive carefully, I'm not going to get in a wreck. But are my chances of not getting in a wreck 100%? Is it a guarantee that I'm not going to get in a wreck, yes or no? No. Because you never know. Somebody could come out of the blue and just T-bone me. And no matter how well I drove, I could still be in trouble. Same thing is true with parenting. Training up your kids in the way they should go, that really ups their chances that when they're old, they're going to be responsible adults. But that doesn't mean the chance is at 100%. Because we all know this. Sometimes temptation T-bones us. And we fall into sin. That's the first thing I want you to know about Proverbs 22, verse 6. Second thing that I want you to know about Proverbs 22, verse 6. Just like sometimes our kids or our grandkids, our family members, our relatives don't always follow our advice, sometimes we ourselves have problems with Proverbs 22, verse 6 too. Because the proverb says that we are to train up our children in the way they should go. How you doing on that? Be honest. Do you always train up your children in the way they should go? Or sometimes every once in a while, do you train up your child in the way that they shouldn't go? Not that anybody in here has ever done this, but have you ever lost your temper with your kid? Because they know how to push all your buttons? You kind of train up your child in the way they shouldn't go. You ever told a lie to one of your kids because you just didn't want to deal with the conversation that would ensue? And you train up your child in the way they shouldn't go? We all do this. And here's the problem. Sometimes when we begin to realize that we do this and we make mistakes, sometimes it can lay on us almost a crushing weight of guilt. Because sometimes we begin to wonder secretly if the reason that our children turned out the way that they did is because of me. If I'm the one who kind of messed it all up. Over 20 years ago now, my mom called me. And I could tell just by the tone of her voice on the other end of the phone that she had something kind of heavy on her heart. And she actually said to me, Zach, I was calling to apologize. And I'm thinking to myself, about what? And she says to me, when you were a kid, I wasn't always the best mom. And she goes back to a time when I was like 4 years old. This was a long time ago. And she says, I was having a really bad day that day. I had a lot of errands to run, and I had a house to clean, and I was trying to vacuum the living room. And we had this old nasty brown carpet. She was vacuuming the living room, and I was only 4 years old, and I, as a 4-year-old, was also having a bad day, which 4-year-olds can have. And so I was in a bad mood, and I was crying, and I was whiny, and I just wanted mommy. And so here's what I did. I wrapped myself around one of her legs while she was trying to vacuum the living room carpet. So she was doing this number, trying to push the vacuum. And finally, she gets so frustrated with me, she says to me, "Zachary, leave me alone. Go to your room and play." And as a little 4-year-old, I just bust out in tears, and I go run into my room, and I slam the door. And she calls me 2 decades after this had happened. And she says, I've just felt really bad about that. And I just want to apologize for that. Do you have any parenting moments like that? Where you kind of wish you could go back and redo or undo what you did do and do it a little bit better? It's so interesting when God is really struggling with his children in Israel. He does have a strategy. And his strategy actually comes out in Hosea 11, verse 4. Here's his strategy. He says, "Ultimately, I led Israel with cords of human kindness and with ties of love." Now, what I love about the strategy is that this is a picture not so much of a parent with a child, but a pet with an owner. Because notice the language here. There are cords and there are ties. Here's what God is doing. He's saying, you guys are rebelling so badly, I just need to put you on a leash. I'm going to put you on a cord. I'm going to tie it to your neck. That's what I'm going to do. Because I can't seem to get through to you. It's kind of like this. One of the things that we do at the end of a lot of our days is we go on a family walk, and we have a little black and white Shih Tzu. His name is Bandit. And Bandit is the dog that we put on the leash. He's the family member who's always on a leash. And maybe you have a pet like this. Bandit likes to sniff every blade of grass. Anybody have a dog like that? And so here's how the walks go. They go like this. Come on, Bandit. Come on, Bandit. Come on, Bandit. Come on, Bandit. And that's the way that it feels to have my pet on a leash. God says when he puts Israel on a leash, he doesn't quite lead them that way. He's not just dragging them along, because notice the kind of leash that it is. It's not just a cord, it's a cord of kindness. And he doesn't just tie that cord around Israel, he ties it around with what? With love. In other words, even when Israel falls into deep and dark sin, God decides to be gentle with them. There's something else I want you to notice about God's strategy in this verse. It comes in the second word of this verse, the word led. God says, I led Israel with cords of human kindness and with ties of love. A little bit of technical work here for you. The Old Testament written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word for this word led is the word masak. And what's interesting about this word is that this is a word that doesn't mean so much lead as it does draw. The idea is this. When God leashes Israel up, here's what he's not doing. He's not out in front and dragging Israel behind him. What he's actually doing is leashing Israel up so he can draw Israel toward him. So that Israel, who's on a giant detour into sin, he can bring them in closer to him. That's God's strategy. Now, there's one more word I want you to pick up on in this verse. God says that when he does this, when he draws Israel in with these cords and with these ties, it's not just a cord of kindness and a tie of love. It's a cord of, and this word's real important, human kindness. It's a tie of human love. And this is the best part of God's strategy. Because God says, here's how I'm going to bring people back to me. There's going to be a human who is so kind and so loving that people just naturally are going to be drawn to him. So, 750 years after Hosea writes these words, there is this human who is kind like nobody else has ever been kind, who loves like nobody else has ever loved. And here's what this human says about himself in John 12, verse 32. When I am lifted up from the earth, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to masak. I'm going to draw all people to myself. And you know what? He does. And you know what? It works. After all, why do you think we're all here? Because the strategy actually worked. God's greatest act of parenting did not come in a rule that he gave. It did not come when he just enabled and overlooked sin. God's greatest act of parenting came in a Savior that he sent. A human who, when he was lifted up on a cross, drew us to him. You see, Jesus, he's the fulfillment of Hosea 11, verse 4. Because he is proof that God still calls us his children. Even when his children take a big old detour. You know, when my mom called me all those years ago to apologize to me for what she had done while she was trying to vacuum the living room carpet, I'll let you in on a little secret. I gladly accepted her apology because I could tell it was really heavy on her heart. But I don't remember that happening at all. Like she'd been carrying this around for over 20 years, guilt and shame, and something I didn't even remember had happened. Here's what I do remember happening. I remember when I was a kid, I got the flu. And this was before the days of Tamiflu. And so all we had was Tylenol, and my fever was 102, 103, and I was miserable. My parents in their bedroom, they had a water bed. Anybody remember those? Anybody have one of those? We didn't have air conditioning, so it was like the coolest spot in the room. And so my mom takes me to their water bed and allows me to spread all of my flu germs all over their bed while she puts cold compresses on my head. I remember that. I remember when I got a little bit older, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but I was a teenager, so I had expensive tastes. I wanted these clothes and these shoes. You know what my mom did? She started shopping at thrift stores because we couldn't afford much more. She shopped at thrift stores for herself so that she could buy me clothes that our family couldn't really afford. I remember that. When we were growing up, we lived in one of those 50s ranch-style homes. Anybody grow up in one of those? There were 5 of us, my mom, my dad, me, my brother, and my sister, 1 bathroom for 5 people, and we all survived. I don't know how we did it, but we did it. Well, to get to the bathroom, you had to pass by my parents' bedroom, and there was one night late at night when I was walking by my parents' bedroom, and on the other side of the door, it was closed. I heard a little bit of murmuring, and so I started eavesdropping. And you know what my parents were doing? They were talking about me. But actually, they were doing more than that. They were praying for me. I remember that. I remember holidays. My mom always used to bake a birthday cake for Jesus on Christmas. Anybody ever do that in your house? Then on the 4th of July, she made that awesome flag cake with the Cool Whip on top and the strawberries for the stripes and the blueberries for the stars. I remember that. I remember, I don't think as a child I went a day without hearing my mom say, "I love you." I remember that. I remember her love. And her love drew me toward her. So much so that apparently I wouldn't let go of her leg. But that's what love does. That's how love works. Listen, if your kids are on some sort of a detour right now, I wish I could give you 5 easy steps to fixing it. But I can't. You can't always fix another person. But here's what you can always do. You can always love another person. And moms, that's what you do so well. And so, one more time before we wrap up, to all the ladies in the room, thank you for loving us. It's a reflection of Jesus' love, and it draws us in because it ultimately points us to Him. And that's why, even if today's a little rough, we're blessed by you. And we're grateful for you. So, ladies, happy Mother's Day. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, on a day like today when sometimes it comes with some mixed emotions, we thank you that you are our perfect parent and you draw us in through your Son, Jesus Christ. Heavenly Father, as His love has drawn us in, may we use the same strategy. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.